Yeah, we're just gonna take that first in. Okay.
All right, so if we get one now. Okay, so on work meeting, possibly leasing will be on track, this one, moving on, just talked about that. Adam, they know that, we don't do it no more. We let it go, it's over. Adam doesn't do it no more, that's sure.
Yep.
So, there's been some issues with the money, taking the money and the thing that's going on with the money up there. And they want to pay in BMO, I think that's what it's called.
Wait, what?
In BMO? Venmo.
Venmo.
So I just had the thoughts, it might be easier, and I want you guys' thoughts on, if we lease, Virgin still owns it, but we lease the BMX track to this lady that's over it now. And then everything would stay the same, she'd pay this, the town would still get the same money, but then she could do it. She could take care of it instead of the town.
That's kind of the contract we had with Adam.
What's that?
I'd say that was kind of the contract we had with Adam. It wasn't actually,
Well, the way it is, and legally, there's supposed to be a town worker sit at the gates to collect the money to do it legally. And we don't have that, for one thing, so she does it, and then it's supposed to be brought in every night after the race, and if that is not brought in for 3 or 4 days, and we're gonna get in trouble if we don't take better care of it than that. And so that was my thought, our thoughts were, we had asked the attorney if it could be leased, and he said, yeah, it can. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just a quick update on the, Santa Clara, they do lease their track out to Brook. Santa Clara leases their track out to Brook. With insurance though, you would have to be removed from the liability part of it. We can still do like repairs or help with that kind of stuff, but as far as insurance goes, she would have to carry her own liability.
That's what he said, he needed some comments. So Santa Clara does it. They lease their track to a lady by the name of Brooke,
mhm.
and this lady works with Brooke.
Yeah. And each one of those riders under the USM, the USBMX is insured for, I think, $5 million. That's part of the fee, is insurance that they pay, the feed race.
So we'd need to be, can we be named as lost payee on that policy?
That's why,
Lost payee?
I don't know on the name on the insurance.
Yeah, it just protects us so that
I
if,
don't.
because it is still our property, even though it's leased to her, then we're,
As far as us losing, are you talking about?
I'm talking about naming us as lost payee in case there's a suit against the town. Because they could name her and the track and us too.
Well, she probably has a Virgin on her liability, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to talk to the insurance lady and see what she says. Liability was the big issue that she was like, absolutely not, if we lease it, we have to keep ourselves off the liability part. So I'm assuming with that being said, if someone does get approved, they sign when they're filling out their paperwork that BMX is liable, not the town person.
Nothing else would change, we'd still do the work on the track, we'd still, everything would stay the same. Basically, we'd do just,
Yeah.
do the money part of it out of our, where we don't have to do that.
And their fee would be just what they're doing now.
Yeah, same thing. 70/30 is what we're doing now, and it all stay the same.
Yeah.
So if
I
there's no
think it's
races,
the
she
way to go.
doesn't- If there's no
Yeah.
races, she doesn't, we don't get nothing, you know,
Yeah.
just like it is today.
Yep, good. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Takes me out of it.
Huh?
Takes me out of it.
I think what we were saying has value. Even if we're off, even if we're not liable, she has, because that stuff can be broken, those walls can be broken.
Right.
She names the town, and she has something that, you know, so
Yeah.
if they break those, if they break those walls.
All right, that better? So from here on, everything's recorded? Okay. I came at the request of Mayor Spendlove and partly on my own account, simply because since the last time we talked in September, we've had a couple of additional septic applicants with large commercial systems come to the city looking for support in the form of what's called a body politic. The state requires that all large commercial septic systems that contain one or more property owners or parties involved be overseen and regulated by a body politic. And what, from the state standpoint, the Division of Water Quality says that in their mind, that body politic owns, operates, and is responsible for all compliance and carries all liability should something go wrong with that system. So for all intents and purposes, although the system may still be owned by whatever commercial enterprise installed it, the body politic has regulatory authority and liability. We were approached by the Steve Labrie project out on Sheep Bridge Road in SR9, and have also had some discussions with the Weeping Buffalo project as well, as they both contemplate either dividing their properties among several different commercial entities and pursuits, and would therefore be required to have a body politic. I approached the mayor at that time because where Virgin is not in our service area, I felt a little bit awkward coming in and acting as body politic and being requested to perform that function without, the endorsement and or support of the city. As we talked about what that would require for us to come in and serve that way, I suggested that rather than simply having us serve as body politic and working with these commercial entities, if the council would want to consider annexation into Ash Creek Special Service District. Now, in the past, annexation has oftentimes included, for other communities, or contemplated the extension of sewer services. And although that may ultimately happen at some point, there's a lot of ground to cover before we would ever get there. And so at this point, annexation would be essentially contemplated to allow Ash Creek to serve as body politic for these what's called large underground water disposal systems. In the state's parlance, that's LUDS systems, to continue to function that way, to work with the city so that as billing for those systems is carried out, it can go along with their water bills and or other service bills that come to those agencies. Typically, annexation has meant for our current 3-member cities that you agree to let me actually just read it right out. I had our attorney, Faye Rever, draft up a resolution if the council was of a mind to entertain. And essentially, it's a joint resolution that, if approved by the Virgin, would then need to go.
I just need some more real diamond. Use this one.
The reason we would need a joint, is that better? I'll try to talk louder too. The reason we would need a joint resolution is that this action has to actually be initiated by the county commission. As a special service district, we're a sub-entity of the county, and the commissioners would need to approve any annexation that takes place. And so essentially, this initial resolution would say, hey, Virgin wants and Ash Creek agrees that the county commissioner should start the process, recognizing, hey, there's some details we have yet to work out to come to a mutually agreeable arrangement, but we're wanting to start that process. The items that have been explicitly included in the rules and bylaws for Ash Creek Special Service District for all of our current 3-member cities is that the town would agree to be responsible for billing and collection of fees and charges for services provided by the district. Now, all 3 of our member cities perform that function, but they also retain 5% of that billing to cover their overhead costs to include our billing with their billing. Number 2, adopt by ordinance and incorporate into the Virgin Municipal Code the district's rules of operation and construction standards as presently constituted or as may be amended from time to time. 3, comply in all respects with said district's rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. Those are kind of the particulars, at least as far as we see it, and the rules that all 3 member cities currently have to abide by, and we would request those same things. I will send a copy of this joint resolution to Monica, if that's all right, after the meeting, and so you can have a chance to kind of peruse it and discuss it. But I would anticipate that if the council's in favor of that option, it would still probably take the next couple of months to actually execute that. Once hypothetical scenario, assuming that Virgin adopted and was annexed into Ash Creek Special Service District, I think a couple of questions in my mind arise. First of all, obviously, we would be agreeing to serve as body politic. Secondly, we would want to take a look at the town's study for sewer service in this area. It was 2015 that it was last updated. From reviewing that study, it was recommended at that time that the acreage density requirements remain at 1 acre. And since that time, that acreage density has increased for certain parts of town. And so what we would want to try to come to an agreement of is how that's administered moving forward. Presumably, we would take over administering septic permits and those kind of issues for any commercial entities, as well as for new residential entities. And so those issues would need to be addressed. Currently, and I've mentioned, and I'll bring this up as well, I've talked with Sitla, BLM, and the bank that currently owns the East Lavercan Bench, at least the private property there. I was approached by Rosenberg Associates engineering firm as an agent for the bank. They wanted to look at developing sewer up to their parcel. Sitla has expressed a willingness to participate or to at least not impede, provide easements and other things if sewer was to be brought through their property, which would allow us to bring, excuse me, sewer through Donkey Hollow, where the Cottonwood Hollow subdivision is in Lavercan, across below Nephi's Twist, but just below where the water tank is for Lavercan. On the south side of that property, it's all Sitla, which is state institutional trust lands property. And then about where the Sitla property ends and the private property begins is where the high point is. So the bank that owns that private property would then be required to put well, I shouldn't say required. If they choose to participate and develop the parcel, they would need to put a pump station. Most of that property flows down to the large wash just before the turn in the road that turns up towards Virgin. That pump station would presumably become the end point and the target for any future Virgin system that would collect sewer and then pump it to that point and be conveyed down off to our Confluence Park treatment plant that we're in the process of designing right now. How much time that will take? We've got Sitla, we've got a bank that owns private property. We have a decent amount of negotiating that would need to take place with UDOT and or BLM for easements from Sheep Bridge and the homes that are to the far west of town, the rest of the way out to the wash where the presumable pump station would be in the future. And usually easement acquisition and property alignments are the time consuming portion of the project. At that point, if, and again, this would have to operate where the city would be agreeable, which means we'd probably need to agree to come back and say, okay, do you want sewer at this point? I know there's been some strong feelings about existing commercial and future residential without needing to encumber existing residential. But the reality is that as new comes, it's going to run past old. And how do we transition that? And who connects and how does that work out? So things to consider that way. I guess that kind of lays out kind of the current plans as far as Ash Creek Special Service District for sewer that would approach Virgin for the East Lavercum Bench. We've kind of been working on that independent of the efforts here, but it is looking like the bank and SITLA may provide enough incentive for us to start to move that direction and work with those entities to get sewer up onto that East Bench. In which case, it does start to become much more viable for Virgin to look at sewer in the future. It's not needing to bear the cost. That takes about a little over half of the amount of sewer piping, out of the total cost considerations for Virgin. So I guess the question that I would have for the council tonight would just be, obviously you haven't had a chance to look at this and we'd be happy to give you time. But we would propose that the council look at it, maybe put it on a future agenda and talk with your council, Heath Snow, to see if that's something that the council is willing to pursue and start the process with the county commissioners. Yeah, so the right now with the way septic tank administration is taking place, by annexing, essentially they would come down to the district, need to sign our agreement, which says you're complying with the current density restrictions, and take that letter down to the health department, which allows the person to move forward, get their tank, and kind of move forward. And so we would collect that fee, and that's the way we do it in the rest of the east half of the county and in the 3 cities we currently administer. Really, the East Lavercum Bench projects run pretty much independent of sewer over here in Virgin, and so I would imagine that it would need to be the type of thing that Planning Commission and City Council would agree, hey, growth has come to the point, it's time to consider this, because I know the one thing that has kept the sewer district from entertaining annexation of some of our neighbors like Leeds or Virgin is that the 3 cities have spent a great deal of time accumulating the reserves to be able to build things like Confluence Park Treatment Plant, and they've been protective of that, and they don't want adjacent communities getting a free ride. So their feeling has always been each community pays their own way. In which case, if sewer was to come in, then it would need to be approved by the town council, or if the town's more comfortable. I know Leeds passed it originally, and then there was an election and they decided to put it to referendum, and the referendum broke 55-45 to no, even though they had about 90% grant funding from the state. And so, but that's the reality is in some of the small rural communities that we have, the temperament of the board can be pretty volatile election to election as far as their appetite for infrastructure, their resistance to growth. Really, since that last happened in Leeds in '96, there really hasn't been a town council in place since that time that was pro-growth in any way. And they have the added concern of needing to work with LDWA, which is, mostly anti-growth to begin with. So, but to Virgin's point, at some point, if sewer was to be extended, there would have to be discussions with Ash Creek, because we would need to establish a rate schedule. We'd need to establish what the impact fees would be for people to connect, what those costs were going to be, and so that as new connections come on, it can be distributed fairly, and that any bonding or debt service that was taken on to install the new infrastructure was being covered by Virgin.
Just looking at we accept you
No, so when, all we do in the county is enforce the Hansen Allen Lewis study. Now, Virgin conducted their own study, and they defined their own density limitations. And so what we would do is come in and then continue to administer the same density limitations that your study had identified, or whatever the current town policy is.
I guess that's my concern. My view eventually serves.
Mhm.
But until that time, I wouldn't want to, as a council or a town, something that's going to hold road from happening, restrict stuff more than what it is until it's served. So I know there's this gap that we're being put on. But, if we were making it harder for developers to come in and say, we can't put in a smaller subdivision, do more zones, may allow it. We can't do that right now because our Ashland Sewer District regulations are tighter than the Southwest Cal, but we won't allow, percolation members to get from the Southwest Cal, so it's a higher standard, making it harder to develop. That's what I would want. I want to make sure that if you're involved with Ashland, it's going to be this difficult deal in that area, that we can continue to grow like we are until such time as something over those.
I do. No, I think there's kind of two key elements in what you're saying. First of all, and I think I can address both of them. First of all, the county had Ash Creek begin administering their policy simply because they didn't have the staff or the ability to enforce it throughout the county. And that Hansen Allen Lewis study that set those septic densities back in 98, they adopted it in 2000, essentially exceeded the limitations of what the Southwest Utah Public Health and as far as what they did on septic. So the health department said, look, we won't take and administer this county policy because we represent 5 counties and we're not going to incur additional cost that's really only to service 1 county and protecting their groundwater. And so the county decided, hey, Conservancy District, Ash Creek, you take the 2 halves of the county, so to speak, and enforce this Hansen Allen Lewis study. Now, some communities didn't participate in that study, but as part of the regional pooling and water sharing agreement, the Conservancy District had the town of Virgin conduct a study, and they conducted their own study. And so I would envision our role is we would be enforcing the town's study. If the town wanted to be able to increase densities or things that way, then they would need to have the backing of science saying, yes, you're not going to contaminate the river, you're not going to create some sort of an environmental liability. We would require that just because now as the body politic per se and or the sewer agency that you've annexed into, we don't want to create the type of situation where the city council is saying, well, acres were good, but now we like halves, and now that halves are kind of spent up, people really want quarters. Now we're going to quarters. Ash Creek, just to keep enforcing whatever we say, we're going to say, no, we need to go back and there needs to be a study that supports any decision to increase densities, because we will end up taking on the liability if we end up seeing high E. coli spikes in the river, or we end up seeing other types of things where issues start to present themselves. You know, some of the impoundments that we see with high nutrient levels, you see algae blooms and things like that, you know. And again, I'll be the first to say, and you can put this on the record, to a certain degree, algae blooms are overblown, but they are an indicator of additional issues in the water system of human sources augmenting the nutrient balance. And so it can start to tell you, oh, we're seeing that. When you can go in and look at a pond that hasn't had problems and now it has problems, well, it may be a low water year. It may be that it's getting a lot more nutrients from another source. Typically, we can go in and we can look for other things that come from human influence, like things that we like to in our laundry, like artificial brighteners, artificial sweeteners. A little bit of some sample testing of the water can pretty quickly indicate, oh, that algae is coming more from human-caused sources than, you know, just it's a low water year or something is going wrong. So there's a balance there, and that's a hard thing. But I think at the same time, as I mentioned previously, because the 3 existing cities in Ash Creek aren't going to want to front the money for Virgin to do a study. Virgin would need to go seek some grant funding. Now, the advantage of being annexed is, can Ash Creek facilitate that? Can we help with grant writers? Can we help with planning and saying, okay, is this a reasonable plan? And how do we move forward with sewer in the future? I think it can kind of cut both ways in that, yeah, we'll probably hold you to, before you move to a lower density standard kind of willy-nilly, we need to meet some thresholds of science. But on the backside, we say, okay, we start including you in our master planning. When we size that pump station, we're going to size it so that we know there's enough capacity to handle Virgin. And so that when Virgin connects, we're not tearing down one pump station to build one that's 2 or 3 times the size to accommodate future growth. And so I think it incorporates your needs into our planning, but by the same token, it incorporates our level of standard for accepting the liability of taking on this responsibility, to put that backing on science and not just, oh, well, the planning commission felt like this is a better idea.
Clearly, this density study is not applicable for residential zone. The study doesn't seem to apply for residential zone, is that correct? So residential zone are already under an acre, and these people have the ability to split their lots and build on them. What we've done is say, you have to approve it from Southwest Health, saying it's okay to build on a small lot.
Yeah, Southwest Public Health isn't looking at densities. They're not looking at protecting groundwater. So if you've moved from 1 acre, like the last study that I reviewed was recommended 1 acre per unit. So if there's been a move from 1 acre to a half acre, then we'd need to say, okay, does the science prove that out? There'll need to be a little bit of study done. 2015. Yeah, I have a copy of it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and I actually received it from Division of Water Quality at the state. And so the state actually wrote a response letter saying we concur with the findings that density should not be decreased beyond that 1 acre. So if there is some changes in the residential code, then that may be something that in this process, we say, okay, well, there needs to be maybe a study that goes to either, well, I guess not support or defend, but are we okay? Do we need to roll back that decision? Because as it sits right now, I haven't seen any other materials from the town or from the state saying, oh no, we've reduced that to half acre and we're all good. Everything I've seen so far says 1 acre. Sorry, you can just ask me because I'm here to serve you guys. You don't have to raise your hand. I don't want to say that I was interrupted like in the minutes or that I'm interrupting by commenting. Mm-hmm. 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 So in the county, the way that that's been administered, and this is countywide, I mean, from Veo to Central to Pintura, if a lot was subdivided prior to the county adopting that Hansen Allen Luce study, the septic density ordinance, which was July 1st of 2000, then it's grandfathered. And so if you have, I'm sure there's a variety of lots throughout town that may be an acre, maybe a quarter acre or something else. As long as the county records show that they were subdivided prior to 2000, they're considered grandfathered and you're allowed to build on those lots with a conventional septic. Yeah.
So the problem is these lots by ordinance are allowed to split too small. So they could be an acre and a half. They split it in half,
Mm-hmm.
build on the second one. What our policy has been is to take that information to Southwest Health and say, does this meet, does the engineering studies, does this meet?
Yeah. So
Yes, and we build.
yeah. So Southwest Public Health, like I'm saying, in the other counties that they service, and even in the other cities where there's not currently any enforcement of the septic density, that's not gonna raise anything on their radar. So what they're gonna say is, now Virgin, you did a study and you adopted it. You're responsible for protecting your own groundwater and protecting things here. If your study said that, if you don't agree with the study, hire somebody else. But
It's back to the same thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We bring you guys in to administer it.
Mhm.
Does that put a halt on all development until we've got studies and everything else? We're stuck.
Well,
Well,
I think it sounds like there's a discrepancy between the way zoning's been administered and the septic study. So it would be the type of thing we say, okay, how are we going to resolve this moving forward? Does the town want to, go to CIB, pursue some grant funding to reinitiate the study and entertain other alternatives like smaller densities? In the study that Rod Mills performed, the town at the 1 acre densities, without adding additional treatment, which means alternative septic that reduces nitrates, he anticipated that they would exceed groundwater nitrate levels, I believe by 2035. And if they started doing treatment, it gave you about 8 to 10 more years, like 2045. But the final recommendation was stay at 1 acre, don't change anything. And so if you haven't seen the study, and that would be something as we go through and say, yeah, let's initiate this process with the county commission. That'll take some time. Or, hey, let's hold off and take a look at our study and see, okay, do we need to realign zoning ordinances? I'll tell you right now, I'm working with Victoria Hells at Washington County. She's been tasked to rewrite the county code. And that's the question all the time. When someone comes in and meets the ordinance for let's say 1/4 acres, or Brookside, we just had one come in where they had 2 acre lots, but in Brookside, they're supposed to have 12 acres per septic tank. So this subdivision had 18 lots where really they only qualified for 4 or 5. And so she had come to me saying, hey, I'm frustrated with the fact that the engineers and the developer will come in and say, okay, we've done a preliminary plat, we've laid everything out. And then the Conservancy District or Ash Creek comes in and says, well, but you don't meet septic densities. And they say, well, but we've met the ordinance by rule. And so what we're trying to do with the county right now is exactly what you're describing. Reconcile that zoning to a certain degree needs to match what the septic density is. I faced the same thing out in Bench Lake. Hurricane City, when I first began at Ash Creek, had zoned several parcels, R15 and RA1 and RA5. So 5 acre rural residential and 1 acre rural residential. But in the Bench Lake area, septic densities require 9 acres. And so as the city was trying to reconcile the zones where they had 1 and 5 acre parcels, the uproar between everyone who owned property out there was quickly, well, why does it even matter? Because Ash Creek requires you to have 9 acres. And it was a good point. I'd agree. It was pointless to zone it as RA1 if people were able to subdivide it based on the ordinance, but it would be an unbuildable lot, an unmarketable lot because they couldn't build a septic on it. Yeah. So what we would need to do is just like we have in Hurricane, or just like I'm working with the county right now, is, hey, let's align that septic policy with whatever zoning is. If we're going to go smaller densities, then maybe what we need to do is change the policy that in Virgin, we require alternate septic tanks. That means they're a little more expensive, but they reduce nitrates. It buys us more time towards the eventual sewer system. But I would say that that's probably pretty important given the timeline, at least from the modeling that Rod Mills has done in that study. It was really like, I remember 2035 and 2045. It was really only about a decade that installing systems with advanced treatment features bought. And so it was by no means an end game, because really in that amount of time and presuming that, that would allow growth at half acres or other things, the pressure politically would start to exceed, I think, the resistance to sewer at that point.
It's just a nice, I think, if we had a set of more active water agencies, which basically say you guys, if they say, we're not worried about your density zones, it meets the requirement by the septic. If you're a smaller lot, but you have, every time you do a quarter lot, that's this much time off. You can do this much and then you run out, that's it.
One of the concerns that we've seen one of the concerns we see there is that ends up pretty quickly driving up values and cost of things where, if you've got 2 permits left, all of a sudden it doesn't matter what lot you're on, get it in and get your permit or, you know, somebody coming in to buy someone else's permit. I think really what would be better off is if we say, look, currently we aren't seeing contamination. Let's relook at the Mills study. It was it Nolte he was with at the time? I'm trying to remember the firm that Rod Mills was with. Ensign, that's right. Look at the modeling that was done there. Say, hey, are we okay with the numbers? Do we feel like this was a thorough analysis? And then say, okay, you know, he had recommended essentially keep the status quo, stay at 1 acre per unit. Now, like you said, where lots are being split and really you're moving from a rural community into more of kind of a suburban bedroom community, you're going to run into that type of thing where people want, you know, 1/4 to 3/4 acre. What used to be the 5 acre ranchette, that's a 1/4 acre lot now. Is, you know, people want a 5,000 square foot garage and toy room and, you know, a 1,800 square foot home and maybe 10 square feet of grass for the Chihuahua to, you know, relieve himself. And so that's the challenge that we're facing is, you know, and that's, I guess, your job really. What is Virgin going to look like 10 years, 20 years from now? And if we can get in and do some planning and things that way, it does ease that transition. The transition will be tough. I can tell you in every community, there's strong feelings about remaining the way you are or moving forward, the inevitability of moving forward. And those are always difficult discussions. But at the same time, planning and being prepared for those situations always makes whatever ends up coming easier rather than having something where we have, you know, problems in the river and the state coming down and saying, you will do this.
So theoretically, if everything is going hard, how long would it take this to get sewer line? Because the reality is, an acre of land here is so expensive
Mhm.
that you're really moving. So going to small lots, that's what we probably want to do.
Mhm.
Obviously, get out of sewer. So how fast could we get sewer?
How fast do you want to take on some debt? Yeah. Well, and I think there's, again, a two-edged sword that if you've read the news recently, Hurricane just approved at least the financial mechanism, the public infrastructure district for the Gateway project, which was the old Elam Valley project. And where you have some commercial pressure from developers, you know, the same mechanism is being used in Tokerville to build the Tokerville bypass road. And so what that does is it allows a developer to come in and encumber certain properties that benefit from the infrastructure to use the collateral, the future tax revenue as collateral for present day bonds. And that's how it works is they'll come in and say, okay, this subdivision is going to be, you know, needs roads, sewer, water, but to get that here, it's a big enough cost. We're going to go out and bond. And as collateral for bond, these people, they'll pay their regular county taxes, but then they're going to have a separate tax, property tax, that's assessed for the life of that bond, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever that is, until that bond's repaid. And so there's mechanisms like that. Typically in places like Virgin, a small community, and this is one reason, as I talked with the mayor a little bit about annexation, a small town like Virgin on its own can get pretty good terms for financing on things. Some grant money, usually pretty good low interest loan money. By annexing into Ash Creek, they'll say, well, Ash Creek's got money. We don't have money like the Conservancy District has money, but we have a mechanism in place. And I think the value that adds to Virgin is planning and maybe a little higher threshold of kind of what we would require for studies and planning and preparation for those steps. But at the same time, you lose, well, right now money's kind of silly cheap anyways. So that, you know, it's a hard question because we could say, look, if the town's willing to do, you know, have a public hearing, we're going to put in a pipeline and start acquiring the easements, and we're willing to use the power of eminent domain to go get those easements, like UDOT would, if they needed it, to get the sewer in place. But we're gonna take it through town, and people are gonna hook up. And that's, you know, that's usually where the rub has come, is that people who are here and existing and feel like, hey, my septic's working fine and I don't want a monthly sewer bill, is usually where the pushback has come. But if you give them a 5-gallon bucket, I've found, and say, rather, you know, recognize what you're doing to the land that you're living on, would you rather pay $25 to have that just go away? It's a pretty good bargain. Well, the challenge that they're going to run into is that these septic systems, although the technology is out there, the scale, yeah, and when they fail, it's really expensive. And so the idea that you can flush and watch it go away, it pays for itself. I think if the folks who are putting these in would go down and talk to Zion River Resort, they may be a little more hesitant to jump on putting in but when there's no other option, and they've got to run their own money models. Yeah.
I just wondered, the biggest polluter of the Virgin River is the Rockville Storage. What's your plan for that?
Stay as far away as possible. Stay as far away as possible.
Fine's the same, $1 gallon or 2,000, so once you start, they say the fine is the same, $1 gallon or everything, so we have to start with the building, start everything. That's not actually.
I think things are going to change there. I think right now, I can tell you right now that they're the what can I say? Things are going to change there. I think they're facing some headwinds from the state. I think there were some things that like you mentioned, that the state understood them to be operating in a certain way, and that at least, and in spite of our efforts to visit with the state and talk about what we observed up there, to the contrary, I think they're realizing like, oh yeah, it wasn't running quite like we were led to believe it was running. And so
What's they were interested in sewer?
well, based on, I shouldn't say that either. I'm sorry. You know, you have to. I mean, I'm on microphone, so they have some challenges.
I mean, is there interest there, realizing the challenges they have, that they want to put one to Ashford? Or they look at do their own system? I guess I'm looking for, are these towns up the river interested to the point that we can help with them to?
Short answer, I would say no. You're looking at 5 miles by yourself to get off the hill. They're looking at 8+ miles just to connect to you. And that's 8 miles of weaving your way between UDOT corridors and Army Corps of Engineers, high water marks, corridor preservation, all kinds of environmental hurdles that I would anticipate that if they intend to resolve the issues they have, they'll need to build a satellite facility that can accommodate what they have. No, there's people who are in, yeah.
Why I asked that is, you know, they're amazing, I don't know where you have the, where they do this thing.
Yeah. I don't know how much active sampling the state's doing, you know, with over the last couple of years, that's been pretty minimal. I know from my interactions on their system as we've gone up, we go up, you know, a couple times a year to help them out with some of the issues that they have. And yeah, the contamination potential, because I can't say, you know, definitively they're causing contamination issues. I would imagine that if it was egregious, it was something that would start to show up in Quail Lake with the diversion. I don't know that to be the case. I do know that based on the way things have been operating up there, that they could probably do some things better. But in their defense, I think they're limited on manpower. They're more focused on kind of the tourism events and other things that are taking place, and so they're a little bit lightly staffed for what they're being asked to do. So I have a little bit of sympathy for them at the same time, in the sense that I think their staff recognizes that they may not be able to give it the attention that it deserves, but they, you know, there's really not a lot of other options. So, yeah, I think I'll tell you right now, I was asked that exact question by the Deputy Director of Division of Water Quality. Are you building that Confluence Park treatment plant big enough to handle Virgin, Springdale, and Rockville? And I told him, if you've got enough grant money to pipe it there. He didn't laugh. I laughed, but I thought it was pretty funny. I think when people up north think of this corridor, they think, oh yeah, Virgin, Rockville, Springdale, it's, you know, like bump, bump, bump. It's like, no, it's bump, bump, bump. It's a long run. It's twice as far to really to get to the lagoons to here than it would be to get you guys to where you could gravity flow off the hill. So it would be, and it really, there's not a great corridor. Like I said, that's the big thing, is easements and or property acquiring for a pipe alignment would be very difficult.
So theoretically, we would, if we went to a contract,
Yeah, at the top of the hill, the bank's property there that they have listed. You know, for quite a while, we had talked about the possibility of a treatment facility up here. I know that they had also looked at that for the East Bench. And so the idea of kind of co-treating waste and keeping the water up here on the bench is kind of intriguing. And in all honesty, I don't know that wouldn't eventually be the end game. You can pump for a long time before you can cover the cost of a treatment plant, though. And it may be the type of thing, once the Lavercan bench is built out and Virgin's more built out, then you have the kind of flows that you can say, hey, that's a valuable resource. You know, you have, I think they had somewhere between, I wanted to say the old Mosaic project had 2,000 or 3,000 townhomes. They were going to do a golf course. And now with the golf course gone, there's probably more room for other properties. So if you have a couple thousand, what we see with water usage in this area is about 4,000 gallons, or sorry, 4,000 homes or so equates to about 1 million gallons a day. When you get to 1 million gallons a day, you're looking at, you know, you can water a golf course, you can keep something like that, or you can keep city parks and school lawns and other things green with that kind of, it's not enough to go house to house with pressurized irrigation. But as far as large community green space and for schools and or other recreational things, you know, it becomes self-sustaining, but you don't have that quantity of water until the rooftops are there. So I, you know, it may be that we start first 15, 20 years, we're saying, hey, yeah, it's a pump station. And 20 years, 30 years after that, it may very well be that, hey, we're going to replace that pump station with a treatment facility. And that treatment facility will treat the water on site and then send clean reuse water out to the different cities up here on the bench. So it's a possibility, but because of the cost and because the value of the water is so high and there's such a small amount of it to begin with, you usually look at other options. I mean, one of the challenges we face in our district is we cover such a diverse topography. You drop off the Hurricane Fault, you drop down into the Virgin Gorge, pumping water up that or taking it down off those cliff ledges, coming down from New Harmony through the Black Gorge. You know, we're always entertaining, where can we reuse it without needing to do that pumping? But until we have kind of a critical mass of rooftops in those areas, it just doesn't pencil.
carbon force.
Yeah. Well, and in all honesty, I think, I think you can say if Zion wasn't found before, it's found. You know, a couple of years ago, when the Park Service manager was coming around talking about quotas, and people were up in arms a little bit about, limiting hotel rooms or other things if they put a quota on the number. It's like, oh man, I wish they would have put quotas. But at that time, everybody's like, quota, you can't put a quota. It's like, you've really got one way in, one way out, unless you're going over through Kanab. And Kanab's going to continue. Kane County's wanting to build a convention center and all kinds of stuff at East Zion, all kinds of things going in up there. And so it's like, I don't see it getting less busy. And so as that continues, and what we're seeing is the trickle down effect of, residual property values of everything downstream will continue to climb as prime properties are taken up, and people will look to buy the next best thing closest to it. When you've got 5 million people coming in and out every year, that's a lot of business to have driving right past your front porch.
You want to get that?
I will send it to her, let you entertain it. Yeah. What's that?
And we'll get it out.
Yes. Yeah. If there's no other questions, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So now we got number 6, and this is about the election we were talking about. Resolution R2012-C. This resolution saying we're something that we're gonna have to approve.
Okay, I move that, is item number 6, R2021-C, on elections to be held by virgin by mail.
Number 7, this is the 2014 Homeowner Bill Agreement, ordinance 2021-36.
So the state law changed on this. It used to say that if you built a home, you couldn't sell it for 5 years. The state came back and said, no, that doesn't work. So what they've done now is, there's a form you have to fill out as an owner builder. The state monitors to see how many homes you build in a period of time. The idea is so that owner builders are not competing with licensed contractors. So our current ordinance doesn't match what the state has changed to, so this changes that. So they fill out a certificate, and then the state monitors how many homes they build over a 10-year period.
I propose to accept 2021-36 homeowner as changed.
You go ahead and motion, Jason, Bill,
I
Dave, Gentlemen, Dean, the ordinance 2021-37, at 40-2, on water district.
52, monthly operating. Let's take that out of chapter 52.
I move we accept 2021-38 definition of operating chapter 2, and so moving them out of chapter 52. We will make motion to accept it, really. Good. Kevin? Ian? 2021-38, chapter 2, that's 115, commission. That was 39, 2021.
This just has to do with disturbance of public works. It's in the land use ordinances. We feel it, we look for public works, and even though all this is in neutral to that, we need public, if the council passes it, and it will be removed from the land use ordinances.
I move we approve ordinance number 2021-39, amending chapter 2.1.
Made with motion, we will second it, really. I'm good. Kevin? Any Under 21-40, amending chapter 2.12, definitions and
It's just removing the ordinance portions from the definition. And that's not. Oh, you guys can.
Removing non-definition.
I move we accept number 11, 21-40, removing non-definitions from the definition.
Second.
We will have a motion to accept it. Leroy? Aye. Kevin? Aye. Dean?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance for 2021-24. Sections of chapter 16.
Move to approve number 16/2021-45, deed restrictions. You can't sell a casita that has the same power source as your utilities.
Second.
Evening, gentlemen. Deborah Macefield. I have a little comment about when did you even discuss bringing the voting only to Virgin and not having Washington County oversee it? When was that discussed? It's on. The voting that you just voted on, the voting system within Virgin for the public, to bring you guys on board or whatever we're voting on, when did you discuss the whole idea of only allowing it to be in Virgin and not have Washington County oversee it? Okay, so what are the reasons why you've decided only Virgin has to not be overseen by an outside body? But that doesn't allow for true transparency. Fair enough. I would like to do that, but right. But I'm just saying on general voting, period. Will we even have a system that will be able to go in with our voting number, and last vote in November, you could go in with Washington County and see that your vote had been accepted in the mailing system and it had been read? Will we have that access to that? We will? Okay. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
My name is Jim Soria. I guess how do you, oh yeah, sorry. So every round of voting, you guys can, or the city council could choose whether they want the county to administer it or you guys could administer it? Is that what you're saying? Every voting cycle, you decide that. So this happens every 2 years? What's that? Okay. And then what, I guess, what assurances do we have that it will be conducted as the county would have conducted it? I mean, Virgin's a small town, and I'm sure there's a lot of. Only they're bigger, they have.
More ballots, more people, more everything. So much.
I don't.
It's not going to happen, and it's happened, and it's not going to change. We're just not going to send them all to the county. We're going to have a box here in the town, or we can put it in the post office, and we can probably do it. It's, nothing changes.
There are certain rules you have to follow,
Yeah.
whether the county
Okay,
And all the people who are running are invited to sit there and watch. They can't do anything, but they can sit around and watch this process.
and all the ballots come in by mail, so no in-person mailing. And Dropbox.
So you have your clerk and two officials. The clerk counts the vote, passes the next official who verifies it, the next official who verifies it. It's always that same pattern. 3 people look at it, verify it, close, read the minutes, who they say.
Okay.
And you elect officials in 10 minutes. People being recipients of the funds. 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I asked that question because I'm the same way. I want it in there. I don't trust the USP and all that. So I want to vote for it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. How long has it?
You know the county did, some of the folks came here that last day, so the county invited the city and the town with those 2 other parties.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Does that help answer the question?
Somewhat. Yeah. It's just I didn't realize that it was something that was voted on every cycle. And how long has the county done it for in this last?
If we don't want to change it, we don't want to.
What did you say? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Evan, you want to talk?
I just want to mention that I gave everyone this synopsis of our financial statement. And it shows the revenue in comparison to the budget. And year-to-date, actual, we're 604,000 in revenue. And we have budgeted 321,000 this time. So about 141% of budget. Our budget was, and as I've stated in the prior meetings, we were very conservative, not knowing what the fires would do. The majority of the revenue that has come in from transit taxes, the hotel and other transit facilities. As far as our expenses, we're about 70% of what we budgeted in expenses, so we're actually going to go on. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that I was concerned from our audit from the CPA about how close we were to our expenses to revenue from the water. But I understand that Jay suggested, since we are bringing in more money than normal, that we should look at a raise. So we have enough money for the infrastructure, that we should set aside some of this excess money that we accumulated this year into the fund, in case we have to do some major repairs. Is there any questions from the council on that?
Just expanding maybe on the point that you are brought up there, we can actually do a resolution transfer those funds, excess funds into that water fund. So we don't have to raise everybody's water bill to cover that. And I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah. I would rather us not do that, and the reason for that, we put it in the water fund, we can have water. It could be used to do water funds, it could be used all for help. Yeah, if we had to use it somewhere. But I think we should